Mm, okay, so something's bothering me about this one. And I want to be upfront about that because usually when I start a reading, there's a kind of smooth entry point, something clicks, and I follow it. This time it's a little different. There's a snag, like two things that don't quite line up, and I keep going back to figure out why. Let me describe what I mean. On one hand, there's this sense of someone caring about you genuinely, not performatively. Um, I can feel that someone in your life holds you in real regard. And on the other hand, almost layered right on top of that, there's this discomfort, something withheld, something that doesn't match the warmth I just described. And normally those two things would feel separate. Like, here's someone who cares about you, and over here, separately, here's someone who's been less than honest. Two different people, maybe, or two different situations, but it's not separate. It's the same person. Let me sit with that for a second because I think it's important to get this right rather than rushing into it. What I'm feeling is someone who actually does care about you and who has at some point told you something, or maybe more accurately, not told you something that wasn't accurate. And the reason this feels uncomfortable to me, the reason it doesn't resolve neatly into good person or bad person, is that I don't think this came from malice. I think it came from fear, specifically fear of how you'd react if they told you the truth. That's different from someone lying to manipulate you or to get something from you or because they don't care what happens to you. This feels more like someone who was scared, scared of disappointing you, maybe, scared of a conversation they didn't know how to have, scared of what it would mean about them if they admitted whatever this is. And so instead of having that hard conversation, they chose the easier path, the vague answer, the thing that wasn't quite a lie, but also wasn't the truth, the omission that over time became its own kind of lie just by existing for so long. Has there been something like that? A moment where someone gave you an answer that felt slightly off, slightly too smooth, and you noticed it but didn't push? Tell me in the comments if something's coming to mind, because I think there's a specific instance here, even if it felt small at the time. Okay, let me try to get more specific about what this is actually about. Because they lied is broad, and I want to narrow it down. What I keep coming back to is something financial or something related to responsibility, not in a dramatic criminal sense, more like an obligation that wasn't met or a decision that was made without consulting you that affects you more than you've been told. Something where the honest version of events would have required this person to say, I didn't do what I said I would, or I made a choice that affects you, and I didn't tell you about it because I didn't want to deal with your reaction. I keep getting this image of paperwork or a conversation that should have happened and didn't, something administrative almost, not glamorous, not a big dramatic confession, just something that should have been communicated and wasn't, and the not communicating has been quietly accumulating consequences ever since. This might also be connected to someone else. Like, this person might be covering not just for themselves, but for someone else too. Protecting another person or another relationship by keeping you in the dark, which adds a layer to it. Because then it's not just they didn't want to disappoint me, it's they didn't want to disappoint me. And also, they were managing some other situation that I don't fully know about. Does any of that feel like it's pointing somewhere, even vaguely? I think for some of you, there's already a person who comes to mind when I describe this, even if you haven't put all the pieces together yet. Now let's talk about the before it hits the fan part. because I think this is actually the most useful part of the reading in terms of what to do with all this. What I'm sensing is that whatever's been hidden is going to become visible regardless of what anyone does. That's just where this is heading. The information is going to surface, not because of some external force making it happen, but because situations like this have a kind of natural lifespan. They can be maintained for a while, but not indefinitely. Something always eventually requires the truth to come out. A question gets asked that can't be deflected anymore. A piece of information reaches you through a different channel. Something just runs its course. So the choice isn't really, does this come out or not? I think it's coming out. The choice is more about how you're positioned when it does. And right now, I think you're in a position where you'd find out the same way everyone else might find out, through circumstance, through someone else mentioning something, through a piece of information landing in a way that's a little chaotic, a little out of your control. What this reading is, I think, is an early signal, not the full information itself, but enough of a heads up that you can start paying attention so that when the fuller picture arrives, you're not starting from zero. You've already had some time to sit with the possibility. That's actually valuable. Being blindsided by something and having had some warning, even vague warning that something's coming, those are really different experiences. The second one gives you a kind of head start, time to think about how you want to respond rather than reacting in the moment from a place of total surprise. I want to talk about why this person hasn't told you yet, because I think understanding their side of it, even if it doesn't excuse anything, helps make sense of the overall picture. What I feel is someone who's been hoping the situation would resolve itself before it became an issue. Like, if I can just fix this quietly, or if this just sort of works itself out over time, then I never actually have to have the conversation. The lie or the omission becomes a kind of a bet that the gap between what's true and what's been said can be closed before anyone notices the gap was ever there. Sometimes that bet pays off. Sometimes things really do resolve quietly, and nobody ever needs to know there was ever a discrepancy. But I don't think that's what's happening here. I think the gap has gotten wider, not narrower. Whatever this person was hoping would resolve on its own hasn't. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to address, because now it's not just the original issue, it's also the issue of how long it's been hidden. That compounding is part of why I feel urgency here. The longer this goes unaddressed, the more there is to address. Every week that passes, the conversation gets a little harder. The stakes get a little higher. The explanation required gets a little more complicated. I think this person knows that. I think there's a part of them that's aware the window for this could have been a small thing is closing, if it hasn't closed already. And that awareness is probably uncomfortable for them too, even if their discomfort isn't really the point here. Let me shift to you for a moment, because I think there's something important about how you've been experiencing this, even without having the full picture. I get the sense that you felt something, not specifics, but a kind of static, an undercurrent of something's not quite right that you maybe haven't been able to pin down. Moments where a conversation felt slightly performative, where an explanation made sense on the surface but left you with a lingering question you couldn't quite articulate, where this person's behavior in some specific area didn't fully match what they were saying about that area. You've probably given them the benefit of the doubt. That's likely your instinct, especially if this is someone you care about and who's shown you in other ways that they care about you. It's easier to assume there's a reasonable explanation for the discomfort than to assume someone you trust is being less than honest with you. But I think the discomfort has been accurate. Not as a final judgment on this person as a whole. People are complicated, and someone can genuinely care about you while also handling something badly. Those aren't mutually exclusive. But as information about this specific situation, the discomfort has been telling you something true. Have you noticed yourself doing extra work to make sense of something, like constructing explanations on this person's behalf for something that didn't quite add up? That's often a sign that part of you already suspects the explanation you're constructing isn't the real one. I want to talk about what happens once this comes out, because I think it's worth thinking through a little, even though I can't give you exact specifics. What I feel is that the actual content of what's been hidden, once you know it, might be less dramatic than the anticipation of it. That's often how these things go. The not knowing creates a kind of open space where your mind fills in possibilities, and sometimes those possibilities are scarier than the reality. Not always. Sometimes things really are as bad as feared, but often the actual information, once it's out, is something you can work with, something that has a path forward, even if that path requires some adjustment. What's harder to work with, usually, isn't the original issue. It's the time. The fact that it was hidden for a while, that's often the part that actually hurts more. The discovery that you were being managed, even gently, even with good intentions, for some period of time without your knowledge. I think you should be prepared for that to be the part that stings most. Not necessarily the underlying issue itself, but the realization of how long it's been going on and what that says about how this person was relating to you during that time. And I think it's okay for that to be hard. You don't have to minimize it or rush past it just because the underlying issue, once revealed, might be manageable. The breach of honesty is its own thing, separate from whatever the honesty was about. I want to address something that I think is relevant here, which is the question of what you do with this information once it surfaces. I'm not going to tell you what decision to make because I don't think that's mine to make. And honestly, I don't think it's something that can be decided in advance before you actually know what you're dealing with. But I do want to say something about the posture I think serves you best going into this. What I feel is that you're going to have more power in this situation than you might expect. Not power in a confrontational sense, power in the sense that once something hidden becomes visible, the person who was hiding it is generally in a more vulnerable position than the person discovering it. They're the one who has explaining to do. They're the one whose trustworthiness is now in question. You're the one who gets to decide how to respond with the benefit of actually having accurate information for the first time. That's not nothing. Even if the situation itself is uncomfortable, your position within it, once things are clear, is actually a stronger one than it's been. You've been operating with incomplete information, which is its own kind of disadvantage. Once that's corrected, you're operating from a place of clarity, and clarity is powerful, even when what it reveals isn't pleasant. Let me also say something about timing, because I think there's a window here that's relevant. What I'm sensing is that this isn't a far off thing. The energy around it feels close, like the situation that's been quietly building is approaching some kind of natural pressure point. Maybe a conversation that's been avoided becomes unavoidable. Maybe a piece of information that's been contained reaches someone it wasn't meant to reach, and from there it travels to you. Maybe this person, finally feeling the weight of how long this has gone on, decides to bring it to you themselves, possibly somewhat suddenly, possibly in a way that feels like it's coming out of nowhere, even though, as we've discussed, it's actually been building for a while. I don't think you have a lot of time to just sit with vague unease about this. I think the specifics are coming relatively soon. And I think the fact that this reading found you now, today, is connected to that timing. Like there's a reason this is the moment you're hearing this rather than some other moment. Um, I want to close with something that I think is important, and it's about you, not about them. Whatever this turns out to be, I don't think it reflects on your judgment in choosing to trust this person or in the relationship overall. People can be trustworthy in most ways and still fall short in a specific area, especially an area where they're scared or where their own issues get tangled up with yours. This doesn't necessarily mean you were wrong about who this person is. It might just mean there's a part of who they are that you hadn't seen yet because it hadn't been tested in this particular way before. And I think when this comes to light, you're going to handle it well. Not because it won't be hard, it probably will be, at least for a little while, but because you're someone who, once you have accurate information, knows what to do with it. That's actually one of your strengths. You're not someone who falls apart when things get complicated. You're someone who figures out the next step. So this reading isn't really meant to scare you. It's meant to give you a little bit of a head start, a little bit of, okay, something's coming, let me not be completely caught off guard when it does. Pay attention to anything that feels slightly off in the coming days. Conversations that seem a little too smooth, a little too quick to move past something. Information that arrives from an unexpected direction. Trust the discomfort if you feel it. It's been right before, even when you couldn't prove it. And when the fuller picture arrives, and I think it's coming soon, give yourself permission to feel whatever you feel about it. The hurt, if there is hurt. The clarity, which I think there will be a lot of. And eventually the sense of, okay, now I actually know what I'm dealing with and I can work with that. You can work with the truth. You've just been working without it for a little while, and that's about to change.